to Professor Yamamura and Tommy Mintz, we've been thinking about and we've been introduced to this concept of repurposing and the impact of art and sustainability. So it's wonderful what you've been doing to kind of use it to raise awareness to challenges and using sustainable materials for your work. So I think that that has a great impact. Thank you. Professor Leggett, you had shared with our panelists a bit about your experience. Would you mind briefly summarizing what your experience has been in this kind of work, and we can open it up for a discussion to see how that might have aligned with some of our colleagues' experiences?
Sure. I think, to briefly summarize an essay, is a challenge in of itself, but I'll do my best. If Wendy is a recovering banker, that's what you said, right, Wendy? Yeah. Then I'd be a recovering lawyer and political consultant. So I entered into my early work with environmental advocacy as a campaign consultant at the ripe old age of 18 years old, fresh out of community college with my AA. Unsure of where I wanted to go. And so that job seemed interesting to me because it kind of combined a lot of my interests and then seemed to be doing something important. And at that time, Mr. Gore and Mr. Bush were having very low-level conversations about the environment. One of them was talking about fear and impending doom, which I think he called an inconvenient truth, if I remember that correctly. And then Mr. Bush was talking about a passionate conservatism, which meant little to nothing in the political circles that I was working with. So the first kind of experience was pretty skeptical. I was mostly going around, just like Wendy, begging people for money so that they would continue kind of a cause that was hard to explain to people. And at that time, in the early 2000s, there was a lot of effort to shift resources to what people now call neoliberalism. I'd call classical liberalism, this idea that the free market will somehow solve everybody's problem. But to push resources into the private sector. And so that, this is hard to imagine, right? But at the time, people were actually saying this quite a bit. It'd be construction companies would be the best ones to deal with sustainability, right? Because there'd be green jobs. We're hearing this again, right, in the Green New Deal, that the market itself would solve these problems. And people would speak about the market as if it were a human, as if it were a real thing, and not a social category that we've kind of constructed. So from that experience, I was, more cynical than when I began. We won the campaign, meaning we defeated the other people who were trying to take money away from public parks and to natural resources. But immediately after that campaign, I was recruited to do another campaign where we were fighting another group. And I kind of saw after those two campaigns where this was going, that this would be the rest of my life, that you're constantly fighting the same problem, which really comes down to the narratives that we use about the problems. So I wanted to then finish my college experience, and I went to the four-year university to study political communication with this idea of social change. And I've been doing that kind of ever since. But I talked a lot about the essays, what the experiences that I had when I was younger are the ones that really prepared me for that moment when I got to community college and then got involved in these issues, is largely came from working in communities that were different than me. Or different than the narrative that I was supposed to be, repeating, or what I was told I should be repeating when I got to community college. And that diverse environment, especially my time with American Indians in the Pacific Northwest, you could say raised my consciousness, but kind of gave me different tools and a different language to use when thinking about our relationship to the environment. And really had nothing to do with capitalism. And so there was, there's this kind of idea of, anti-capitalism, but then there's a whole other world without capitalism. And I think that was important for me to understand as I went through this kind of political economic work in the future.
Thanks, Jason. And I just want to